Thanks everyone for coming out to the pre-show talk for Gatz. I know some people got to see the performance, the opening night performance last night, and some people are seeing it for the rest of the run. This is something that we do to open up the conversation with some of the creators about the show, about the process. So we are thankful that you all are here, but also this is for our live stream audience, either for those who couldn't be here or are somewhere across the world. So partly because of that, we're asking that when we open it up to questions that everyone speaks in the mic so it can actually be in the live stream. So thank you for that. This is going to run about 30 minutes, and then for those seeing the show tonight, you'll have a little bit of time before the house opens. Okay, I just want to introduce our amazing panel. Our very own Executive Artistic Director, Bill Bragin, who's going to be moderating the conversation. Ariana Truman, the producer for Gatz. John Collins, Director Creator. And Lindsay Hockaday, the Education Director and a performer in the show. Without further ado, Bill.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming. I want to thank the panel for taking some time out when we're in the middle of a run of 3 8-hour performances. And given that some people have seen the show and some people haven't seen it yet, we're going to try to avoid spoiler alerts, but we'll have some references. But we'll try not to go too deep into giving away some of the turns of the piece. But one of the images that really struck me watching it again last night, I had seen it. The last time I had seen it was in the New York run about 6 years ago, and there's sort of an ongoing theme where the clock keeps coming back up and there's attention is drawn. So I've been thinking a lot about time. And so let's take you back to the beginning of the piece in Gatz. And if you could maybe talk a little bit about elevator repair service and what you were doing as a company right before Gatz and how that led into this piece.
Well, one thing we were doing right before we started on this very long process of making this thing that we're doing now was we were taking a break. In fact, the company was thinking about folding. Like we were feeling a little creatively exhausted. We'd had a big meeting and we said, look, let's take some time off. We can't think of anything else to do. Let's take a break. So part of the way Gatz started was that I think Scott and I were both just a little restless to do something. And we had made a stab at the Great Gatsby once before. In a very different version. We'd done a little bit of a couple of scenes from chapter 1 and chapter 5, and then put it aside because we couldn't get permission to use the text and we were doing other things. So we said, let's try that Gatsby thing again. So the genesis of the show really was not a big, ambitious idea about anything like what we're doing now. It was, let's just get this book and kind of play around with it in a little room and see what we come up with. And it was really just to sort of keep ourselves entertained while we were on a hiatus from making new work. And so we were in a little office up above a theater where Scott and I both were working, and we got a different guy who was playing Gatsby then to come back and join us. And that was where the idea was born to set it in an office. We said, let's just use this like it's our set and see what that tells us. So I think a lot of the ideas were ideas that we found or that we just experimented with, not things we had, big grand ideas for or big plans about. It was very organic that way.
And for those who might be encountering elevator repair service for the first time with this piece, can you talk a little bit about the kind of work that ERS was making prior to that hiatus? And if people had seen a piece from, let's say, 6 years prior to Gatz, what would the nature of that work have been?
Well, you would have seen more dance in it, for one thing. It's funny, like Gatz is the show of ours that more people know than any other one, but it's also a strange exception in that there's not much of a movement component to it. Our work often, and since, to some extent, has had a lot of dance and movement in it. But what connects Gatz to that work from before and also what came afterwards is that we always liked to pick ideas that seemed really problematic We liked to pick an idea that seemed wrong or ridiculous or impossible. You know, some crazy idea that didn't seem like something you should do on stage. That was what we liked. And that was why we got excited about doing this novel, because doing a novel on stage is not something you're supposed to do, at least not like this. You know, you adapt it. You rewrite it into a play to make it easier to do on stage. We like the difficulty. We like the show right before Gatz had been a show where we thought we'd try performing entirely in the dark, or keep the lights really, really, really low and see what we could get away with doing with no light on stage. So those kinds of ideas were what motivated us, you know, things that would mean we had to get together and solve some crazy problem together. So in this case, the crazy problem was, all right, let's do every word of this novel on stage.
So Ariana, as the producer, when the sort of artistic mandate of the company is to find something that's really difficult, if not impossible to do, what's your dynamic like? How does that negotiation happen, and how do you take these sort of ambitious, lofty ideas and say, yeah, okay, we're in, or no, you're crazy, we're not doing that?
Well, my job as a producer is not really in any way like a traditional producer, and so more what I do with Lindsay's help, because she's also the associate producer, is to, once something is in motion, find all the ways to keep it supported logistically. So there's no part of our process in which I say, John, you're crazy. He sometimes has this thing where he says, oh, we're just going to do this as a side project, and I say, we don't have side projects. Like, we're just one little company, and everything we do is what we do. Some things have like a larger, premiere in a big theater, and some things are more done like in a gallery or a library or that kind of thing. And that's what he means by side project. But really, we're so small. Resources of our go into, just making sure that we have space and time. And a huge part of my job is sort of cultivating and maintaining relationships with people like you in institutions who can present us, because we don't have our own theater. And, for Gatz, I was not the producer for the company when it started, and I sort of slowly evolved into the producer because of the improbable success of this improbable production. It's just captivated the imagination of people all around the world, and it sort of catapulted the company into this place of having access to a lot more resources. And because it's been, presented 24 times, I think 26 at this point. So because of that, we have, many more opportunities than we used to have. And then that means that each of those opportunities where Gatz has been presented can lead to opportunities for the next project. So that's a huge part of what I'm doing, is just keeping all the pieces together.
And Lindsay, when in the process did you join?
Well, I joined in the way many new actors get involved, actually, which was to replace somebody on a tour of the show who couldn't, I can't remember what the reason was, but the person playing Catherine couldn't make the tour. And then I've since been folded into the subsequent shows at ERS as like an original ensemble member. So that is often how we work together, is that there's like a sort of ongoing, evolving ensemble of performers who will replace each other on tour, or and sort of get re-invited in that way. And so there's kind of a new, constantly evolving mix of people in the room when we make new work too.
And you're wearing multiple hats in the company. So you're associate producer on this, you're in the company on stage, and you're also the educational director. And in a couple of days, we're going to be having a 2-day sort of intensive workshop to share sort of your creative process that I think when John was here in a sort of a planning trip, described the process as not being a process. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit of that non-process, and particularly how that helped turn Gatz into what it is.
Well, John can speak to that too, especially more about Gatz, but I would say that the workshop is about sort of taking, like John said, what is the people who are in the room, the room that you're in and the text or the materials or the source materials that you want to work with, and allow those to inform you of what the process for that particular show is going to be. So we really like to just be like as open as possible to, if this is a poem, if it's a YouTube video, if it's a, some people joke about the phone book, right? Like, what is the structure of that item, that source, and how is that going to inform how we translate this into theater and into performance. So that's, what, if you want to come to that workshop, what you have to look forward to. And John can talk more about how that worked with Gatz.
Well, yeah, when I say we don't have a process, I mean, in our very early days as a company, I really wanted us to have like that thing. I wanted to have an answer to that question. When you say, what's your process? I'd go, well, here's what it is. First we do this, second we do this, and third we do this, and then we've made a perfect ERS show, copyright, trademark, That, it became clear to us very early that something like that doesn't work. And what that amounts to, if you've got your process that you want to do things the same every time, then you're putting yourself ahead of your material. We want to put our material first. We want to have as honest an encounter with the material that we can. And so we choose things that are going to be difficult. Like I said, we want these impossible problems to solve. We don't want to know how we're going to solve that problem when we take on an idea like do this entire novel on stage. And we've done 3 novels, and we've done the 3 very differently. And not because we lost faith in our process, but because they were 3 very different novels. They presented us with 3 very different sets of problems, so we did them differently. Even though even at that stage we had some temptations to try to do things the same way each time. Now I think our work always has things in common because we are the same people doing it. That's what gives our work its familiar character, not that we have a series of steps we repeat every time. I mean, we may repeat some steps, but sometimes we do that by accident just because we're driven by our own personalities, our own tastes, our own sense of humor. But, we like to come at each project as a kind of blank slate and try to figure out what that material is asking us to do. So when we do the workshops, what Lindsay was describing, we try to create a little microcosm of that situation. We bring in some text, maybe a little bit of random video we found, and then we also consider whatever weird little room we're working in. And maybe most importantly, we consider the people that we're working with. So we want people who take that workshop to have that experience of letting everything that's there inform what gets made. Not some idealized idea of how theater is made that we invented, but more a kind of philosophy about what you listen to when you're making something. And that's, and that can produce wildly different results, but it feels honest to us to do it that way.
And in terms of your relationship to the source material, there's some devised theater companies who set out to adapt or respond to existing source material, and they do it because they really love that work. And some set out to do it because they really hate that work, and they intentionally set part of it is their hostility or skepticism towards the source material becomes part of the constraints and the challenges of the piece. Where do you all kind of lie in terms of The Great Gatsby?
Well, I mean, I love this book. I love it though because from what I've learned about it from dealing with it. I honestly, there's a kind of neutrality I think we try to have in the beginning. I don't want to do something. I mean, I will do things sometimes because I have a keen interest in the subject matter already, or a fascination with it, or even a love of it. But it's very important that there's no preconceived idea about what it should say. So I don't think having a real strong agenda is a great idea going in, because you don't want to have an argument with the material about what it's saying to you. So I didn't really know The Great Gatsby very well before we started doing all this work on it. I learned this book by doing this. I didn't read it in high school like most people do for whatever reason. It just wasn't part of the curriculum at my small town southern high school. But so, again, we like something. What we're looking for is something that's going to stimulate us to do something fun and interesting and engaging with our medium, which is theater. What we love first and foremost, more than anything else, is just live performance, about creating something live in front of an audience. And we want to have an honest encounter with our material that's going to contribute to that process, that experience, that sort of alchemical synthesis of something that can only be live theater.
And in that process of investigating the text and kind of synthesizing, how much are you looking at sort of commentary and scholarly work and other interpretations of the work, and how much of it in the process is really going directly to the text and to the people in the room and letting that kind of lead the piece to where it becomes?
Well, I think as a performer, Lindsay, you can speak to this too, or both of you can. You're both involved with how we investigate our work. We like to find as much as we can to look at, along with the actual central source material of the show. But we're not looking for like the right answers. We're just looking for more stuff to respond to. I mean, I don't know. Talk about that from the perspective of a performer.
I mean, and definitely some ensemble members are way more dramaturgically minded than others, and it's sort of it's nice to have all those different interests in the room. Like, there are people who are really free associative that'll bring in like a video that reminds them of another video, and then I'm kind of like a nerd. Like, when we did Shakespeare, I was like, this is what this word means. I just did this, like, and, I really dug into and so I think having everybody respond in all sorts of different ways is really helpful, and in some ways I think that we try to take care not to sort of have this predetermined meaning, right? Like, because this scholar says that this book is about this, but rather be these human beings in real time encountering our source material. And the nice thing about Gatz is that, I mean, speaking to your previous question, the dissonance sort of the office of these characters encountering this text, I think it allows people to have their own critical response, if they were to have it, about some of the things that are a little more troubling about the Great Gatsby, all the anti-Semitism and racism and things like that. Like, I think that there's a little bit of space, right? There's a human being on stage that's kind of responding to this text, not necessarily fully representing it in a real one-to-one naturalistic way. And I think that, our dramaturgical work helps to support that and to kind of allow us to really be our own selves on stage while also portraying something, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll open it up if some of you have got some questions. And you spoke about dissonance and sort of the different kind of dissonances. And Ariana, you pointed out that this show has become your most successful touring project, and it is a piece that's based on the great American novel, and it's also the piece that you've brought to probably the furthest reaches of the world, including the UAE. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you think that such an American piece lands as you're on tour. How does it resonate? Does it resonate in different ways in different cities and different countries? Did you get a different feeling last night in the audience with it opening here?
Well, I think, people call The Great Gatsby the great American novel, right? So I think people all over the world have read it, and I think a lot of times I remember when I read it as a sophomore in high school, I was sort of told what it was about, and I remember not really, I couldn't even really understand the plot when I read it in high school. And it was only after watching it on stage many, many, many times from this production that I actually finally understood the sequence of events. So I think so many people come to see this thinking, this is a story about the jazz age, and this is a story about a man reinventing himself. And I think for many of us, so many other aspects of the novel are what have become the most engaging parts of it, like what this character, this sort of central narrator character is, and how he sees the people around him, and what these sort of like intimate relationships are of these people in the story, rather than this kind of mythical tale of American grandeur or whatever. So I think, I feel what often happens with this show around the world is, we've done it in all over Europe and Australia and Singapore and all over the United States. And I think people come to it with that in mind of whatever they learned when they were 15. And I think because of the sort of slow time engagement with the text, and as Lindsay was saying, because you're not watching, these actors aren't perfectly cast as the characters. You know, they are people who sort of become the book, and in many ways what the play is about for me is about the creative act of reading itself. And so it becomes this very personal story for the people in the audience in a way that I think is very unexpected, and I think that's why it's so hugely successful, because other people have made the beautiful movie of it or whatever with the gorgeous costumes, and I don't actually think that is the heart of the book, and it's definitely not the heart of this production.
So I'm gonna open it up to questions, and I'm gonna ask people to come forward and grab one of our microphones to ask. And why don't we start with you?
I'm just going to slide across the cushions. My question is actually picks up just on what you were just saying, which is I was in the audience last night, and I've read this book probably 100 times. I teach it, and I thought, well, nothing is going to surprise me. I know this book, right? And I left completely surprised, which was amazing and a gift. So thank you. But I'm curious about what it's like for both the performers and the producers as you listen again and again and again, and if you're aware of your perceptions about it having changed as you do it. You know, you started it and it was sort of this, but last night it felt like that, or if the context makes it, well, it was really funny tonight, and the 2 months ago when we did it, I was almost, do you know what I mean? So I'm curious about your slow time engagement, I guess, with the text over time.
I mean, I'll just say I haven't been involved in it as long as some of the cast members have, but it's completely taken over. You just start to like embody it on a cellular level, the novel. And there's a joke backstage and with actors that like the text is hyper relevant. Like you'll be in any life situation and a line from the book will come up and it'll be relevant on, and has inhabited our lives, and some people even more than myself because they've been doing it for literally 10 years or whatever. So it absolutely, and then as the performers age, it's really, I think it takes on an even more beautiful, I love how as the performers get older, they get sort of more distanced from, how these characters would be, if we were staging it realistically, and there's something so incredible about that to me that makes it more and more profound as that happens. Because it is such a iconic, text that everybody has to read.
I mean, I've watched every performance of it, and I occasionally sneak out and go to dinner or something, but I come back. But I always come back, and I because the performance deliberately distances itself from the novel in a way, that actually keeps creating the opportunity to hear it fresh, because that's what we're staging. I mean, we're staging this idea of someone discovering it. And so that it sort of puts you in that position via Scott, who's reading it, to try to erase your memory of it and start over each time. And that... And some of that we're playful about, and we're not afraid to be a little irreverent with it and playful with it. But I think that helps regenerate that sense of discovering it. And I still hear things that I haven't heard before. I mean, and sometimes I'm embarrassed when I'm like, how did I never hear that connection before? Like, for some reason last night it was those who guessed at his, a sentence that something goes like, those who guessed at his corruption while he stood there with his uncorruptible dream, or something like that. And I was like, oh, right. He sets up these things so beautifully, and sometimes the sentences are so simple, and the structure is so clean and efficient that things can roll right past you. And they'll come to me years later hearing it. I mean, I think that's just another way of saying this is the writing is brilliant. It's really, really brilliant, and that it finds a way to reinvent itself over and over again, and it can sustain this. You know, it's not so much that we have survived our encounter with the novel. It's just that this novel is so great, it can survive this ridiculous onslaught of theatricality and nonsense from us in a way where all that we do to it and throw at it and all the ridiculousness just proves what a great book it is.
There's also something about just not about the book, but just a little bit more like what Lindsay was talking about us as a group of people like aging together, like aging like 8 hours at a time through each performance, but also aging over the years and years. You know, it had its world premiere in, well, 2006 officially, but 2005 was really when it was completed. And we haven't done it every single year since then, but we have, you know, just done it a lot. And my role in the show has changed from I was the company manager, and then I was the stage manager, and now I'm just kind of the person who hangs around. And I don't see every performance. You know, I sort of set it all up, and then I can go basically once the show is up. But I love to stay, and I love to both watch it and then be backstage. And there's something about there's a woman, Maggie Hoffman is an actor whose last night was her first performance. There are 2 new actors this time. And afterwards she was saying, I kept wondering, what is it gonna be like to do an 8-hour show? Is it like doing a 2-show day? You know, that's something you often have to do as an actor. She was like, it's nothing like a 2-show day, because you go and you just keep going and you're like living through this thing, and it's like a normal work day of 8 hours. And that becomes sort of like the special quality of it for all of us.
I saw this last night, a really phenomenal show. One of the themes is about memory, reality, and the stories that we tell ourselves. Can you describe your choices in describing some scenes, acting out others as the characters, and acting out others as the office workers?
From the beginning, once we decided that the way to do this was to set it, or the way we were going to try to do this was to set it in this completely unlikely setting, and then try to create a staging of it by contriving these coincidences. You know, there's a boom off stage, and the narrator says, then there was a boom when Tom Buchanan closed the window. It was almost a kind of musical rhythm of the 2 things interacting that we wanted to generate. We wanted to build to kind of peaks of total synchronicity between the office and the world of the novel, and then have them and then have the illusion of the novel vanish. And this was something we thought about just in a purely formal way. I mean, a lot of the times the way I approach directing is just by a kind of intuitive feeling of when there should be a lot of activity and when there should be stillness, when there should be high drama and just, you know, and mundanity. And as we worked on this long project, we started to kind of understand that office world in a way could have a certain power of its own as a sort of countervailing force to the novel. So we found, for example, that it was actually kind of powerful to have the office lights pop on right after I don't think this is a bad spoiler, but have the office lights pop on right after one of the most violent things in the book, somebody getting killed. And so that became a way of letting the novel give our idea of these workers in an office some kind of mysterious power, and vice versa. So, you know, it was about negotiating these 2 things that were constantly giving and taking from each other. And it was an intuitive process that way, ultimately.
I was just going to say, also, it's interesting that Fitzgerald often describes what people say versus letting them say it with quotation marks. And I always find that fascinating, too. It's like, was he trying to save time? Or was he just, you know what I mean? Because it is more, there are moments in the novel, as you read it, that are more theatrical in the sense that there's like these short sentences of people talking to each other. And then he'll have like a paragraph that's like, he explained to me that he was from da-da-da-da-da. You know what I mean? Like, so anyways, I think that's also the novel, probably more than it maybe even seemed, really gave us those answers, too. small.
I think this is more of a process question, which when dealing with a literary novel that is supposed to be one of the most, not supposed to be, is one of the most highest regarded American novels, right? How did you treat the language? By which I mean, it feels, I haven't seen the show yet, I'm going to see it on Monday. It seems as if it's almost an actor in the sense that you give it that attention, but then how do you give it the room to fill that space when you're directing, when you're treating it that way?
Well, I think one of the things that we decided this would be early on was that we were not going to try, we wanted the novel to exist on stage as this kind of autonomous object. You know, we didn't ever want to try to replace it. And I think it's a trap that a lot of adaptations of this novel fall into, which is where they treat the novel like it's a story with imagery and characters, but it's not writing. It's that like somehow all of those things can be taken from it and used to make a new version of it. But in fact, I think what we began to realize as we worked with it was that the actual arrangement of the words themselves were so critical to the identity, to the soul of this thing. It wasn't just like an interesting story or a, lesson about reinvention or these things that you learn about as the themes of it. It was really this sort of perfect crystal of words arranged. So we had a kind of commitment from the beginning that whatever we did around it, we wanted to make sure we made choices that let the novel itself stand and let those words stand. I mean, the most basic one was just saying we weren't going to edit it at all, so that no matter what crazy stuff we did around it, the novel could still maintain its integrity. And I think that was enough. And I think sometimes people are a little startled that we bring a sense of humor to it, or that we are irreverent, or that we are playful with it. But in some ways that lets the greatness of the novel stand out in relief against our sort of awkward, messy theatricalization around it.
Hi, thank you. So the production last night was my first introduction to The Great Gatsby itself. And I have a question about how you actually managed to map the entire reading of the novel in this time span of 8 hours. So I haven't read the novel, so I don't know how long it precisely takes to read through it. I have a sense now. But during, when you were thinking about overcoming this difficulty, for the time, did you intuitively feel the rhythm of the novel? Like you said, you've been working so long with it, it's become almost like a cellular structure. But did you intuitively feel the rhythm of the novel and know how to break it down into different acts, or is this a result of many, many hours of practice and finding precisely where the novel ends off?
Well, there are a couple of things. One, I did not think we would actually be able to pull it off. I thought the idea of doing the entire novel and not editing it was something we came up with kind of as a provocation to ourselves, not as a plan. And I actually expected it wouldn't work. Like, I thought that, I remember specifically thinking that somewhere around chapter 4, we were going to give up and start editing it. We were working through in order. And I thought, there's that long conversation that Nick and Gatsby have when they're on their way to New York, and Gatsby's talking about being in the war, and I was like, we're never going to get through that. That's when this idea is going to fail, and it'll fail in some interesting way, and it'll produce some result that we weren't expecting, and I was perfectly happy with that. That kind of failure can be, generative and interesting. So we didn't have a sense of it early on. I had a kind of deep intuitive sense after reading it that like it was great and it was efficient and it had a kind of integrity that demanded that the sentences not be rewritten or cut. But it was really the process of just working our way through it slowly and finding that it kept working. And so there were ideas about the rhythm that we were getting as we went. The other thing practically that we did was we sat down in a big circle and read the novel out loud to each other, just because I wanted to know how long it was. And that was informative. That was like, okay, it takes 5.5 hours to read it out loud, which is about what it would take to read it out loud. So that told me that it was worth pursuing the idea. Right. But it's also been through many incarnations. I mean, when we did it in 2005, rhythmically, I think it probably sounded pretty different.
I think it found the slower parts, don't you think? It found the slower parts later. And by the familiarity that the performers have with the text, it allowed them this kind of like peaceful possession of the language and the moments to just take absolute time with it. If John had said, oh, I've got this idea, we're going to do it, and this section's going to be really slow and we're going to take our time, I think it would have felt hollow probably. But everything sort of organically found its way there. And I remember feeling like it was like magic, because I can't remember now, but was it up through chapter 5 that we did at the collapsible hole, halfway 5, and so it's all this like very active, and it felt like it was so fun, but it was like it left us really wanting to know what is the rest of it going to be like. And I remember thinking it's not going to work for sure, and then just being like stunned at the beauty that they all found by faithfully, honestly, unaggressively working through it to find what their own truth is in response to it, as opposed to what is the truth of it. Do you know what I mean? And it's a really big difference.
The last thing I'll say is just, I think the novel itself has a great rhythm, and we learned over the years to just trust it. You know, as we got more comfortable with it, we just learned to trust it. That's how it worked.
Okay, I think one of the things that I just struck me when we were talking is about going into this with the potential for failure, and that the sort of the experimentation that was part of your approach. And for the Art Center, when we've been sort of describing ourselves even before we existed, one of the phrases that we've been using is a laboratory for performance. And I think the black box where this is being staged is the space that more than any kind of within our own facility is the laboratories where a lot of work is being devised. And I think for NYU Abu Dhabi as a university, that idea of theater making as a research practice and as an experimental practice is something that's been really important to us. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think in terms of why bring a piece like The Great Gatsby to NYU Abu Dhabi, I think that spirit is a big part of what attracted us to it. So I want to thank Ariana Truman. I want to thank John Collins. Lindsay Hockaday is in the company, so she just had to leave to get ready for the show. So you'll see her on stage in a little while. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you who are watching it on Facebook Live. And we'll hopefully, if you don't have your tickets for today, there might still be a few tickets left for Monday, which is actually F. Scott Fitzgerald's birthday. So it's a very romantic day to see it. And if you've already seen it and want to see it again, you can try to approach as many times as John and Ariana have seen it.
The last time we performed on his birthday was in 2006, and some weird things happened on stage.
We're just saying. All right, well, thank you very much. All right, take care.